Hello and welcome. For today's edition of our webinar series exploring AI through a Catholic lens, we are joined by Father Philip Larrey, professor of philosophy at Boston College, Taylor Black, director of AI and venture ecosystems at Microsoft, and Matthew Harvey Sanders, CEO of Longbeard. So, for today, we want to look at how much the world is going to change due to AI. In this discussion, we want to look at key advancements, their societal implications, and how much the church's historical role in navigating technological revolutions can offer guidance. This is also a reminder for our audience watching online that if you have a question, please share it in the comments. There will be time at the end to ask some questions to our speakers. So, Father Philip, I'd like to begin with you. We're hearing a lot about AI transforming everything. From your perspective, what is the single biggest change we're about to see in our daily lives or in the world around us because of AI that most people aren't fully grasping yet?
Probably the fact that AIs are going to become agents. This is a new subject, primarily in philosophy, agency. Artificial intelligence and agency, and that simply is when AI platforms become more and more autonomous. The tendency is for us humans to give AIs more and more autonomy because they are impressive at what they do. And they're getting even more impressive in terms of speed, in terms of what they can cover. For example, the data that they have to use, the subtleties and the closeness to human thinking and human interaction. We have AI platforms that are now primarily focused on emotional relationships. So even though I consider those as false relationships, they seem real, and they do address emotional issues within human beings. But not to get too much off of the subject, I think what a lot of people don't understand is they go through their normal life. Today, for example, in Boston, we have a lot of flooding in different places of the city. So AI isn't going to do much for that. You're stuck in traffic and your car may be flooded because of the rain. AI may help you in terms of information and getting around to different streets that aren't flooded and whatnot. But in a practical sense, the AI isn't going to stop the rain. So in that, I mean, people have to get up and go to work and deal with traffic on the interstate and things like that. So a lot of I think a lot of people just feel that AI is irrelevant to their daily lives. However, on a different level, what we're going to see are autonomous agents working and interacting with human beings, and I think that's going to significantly change society.
Fantastic. And Taylor, if I may turn to you, many people are wondering about their jobs and the future of work. How do you see AI truly redefining what work means for individuals and for entire industries in the coming years? What should people be doing to prepare?
Yeah, that's a really big question, and I think we can approach it with a lot of trepidation, because when you have a fundamental technology shift like AI provides us, similar to the Industrial Revolution, similar in some ways to the invention of writing, it can be hard for us living in the current paradigm to look past the technological shift to see the new abundance and jobs that can be created post that shift. But as Pope Leo reminds us, it's a really important thing to consider, not just having that rosy-eyed view towards a future that has yet to be built, but really working through the hard parts about a large technology shift in our daily lives, in our daily workplace. I think that AI really is going to touch every industry, every sort of role and position. It's certainly already touching white collar and technology jobs in particular. I'm anticipating, and I This is consistent with a number of other thinkers, perhaps not with Microsoft's official view, certainly, but that somewhere around 2/3 of white collar and technology jobs are going to dramatically shift in terms of what they do and what they cover. And in the near term, that's scary. Things that I've built startups on 10 years ago have become easy and trivial, and such that I wouldn't be able to build a startup around that sort of thing today. This doesn't mean, however, that the human role in that sort of work and in that sort of employment disappears. It means that it changes. And what that change entirely looks like, how we can prepare for that, it's really leaning into our humanity. That can sound all philosophical and warm and fuzzy, marketing speak rather than concrete reality. But I think in this podcast we're going to be unpacking a little bit what that means. Most fundamentally, though, it is that you as a moral agent, you as a pursuer of truth, of correct answers, of what good looks like, can utilize these AI tools in ways that expand your capacity, expand your effective freedom. And it's there that you should be playing around with them, working with them, creating with them in order to land in this new technological paradigm well prepared.
And Matthew, if I may turn to you, the pace of AI advancement feels incredibly fast. What is one major misunderstanding or common fear people have about AI that you believe needs to be clarified?
So many things. So many things. I probably, the one that I think is probably the most harmful is that AI is kind of, is going to set out to destroy humanity. For some reason it concocts of its own. I'm not saying that it's not possible that we build some AI that just connects dots the wrong way and considers us somehow an impediment to its flourishing. But all the tests that we're seeing, I mean, aside from like red teams, which are testing these models internally and they're trying to provoke such behaviors, we haven't really observed much of that in the real world, frankly. And so I think as we continue to scale up capability, I think I'll be less afraid of models, at least in some ways, at least of the models themselves. And doesn't mean I won't be more afraid of what people may do with them. But I don't think being fearful of AI makes a lot of sense at this point. I think what we should be fearful of is how people use the AI and how people may react to AI, not just AI into embodied AIs like robots, once they really start moving into greater production and they start really kind of threatening not just white collar jobs but blue collar jobs. I think for good reason, people would worry about will I be able to pay my mortgage and put my kids through college and feed them and so on and so on. So I think it behooves us to ensure that we're talking, having a very broad and robust civil conversation about the way these technologies, like in the nearer term, are going to be affecting our societies, and ensure that we have the right safety support systems in place. And frankly, that there's just a vision that we can all kind of get behind for the future.
And Matthew and Father Philip, I'd like to get your perspective on this. Taylor mentioned, how we lean into our humanity, and I really like that image, and I think that's so clear and kind of a beautiful way to, as the technological sphere kind of seems to kind of take over. But as we look at this rapidly evolving landscape, where do we as humans truly fit in? What unique aspects of being a human will become even more valuable or essential as AI becomes more capable? Father Philip, I can throw that to you and then get Matthew your response on that.
A friend of mine who lives in the Valley sent me a photo yesterday of a poster at a bus stop, and it said, "Don't hire humans." And the picture is three humanoid AI generated people. And of course, in the Valley, Waymo is they have over 200 cars which are self-driving, and they're taxis, and a lot of people use them, and they're very reliable. They're Jaguar cars with Waymo technology, which is a spinoff of Google. But that poster really hit me. Don't hire humans, because a human did that. A human it's not some AI company that promoted. Maybe it was an AI company, but it just struck me where we're going with this. Don't hire humans.
It is an AI company, though, and you have to say they got us talking about it. So it's a brilliant marketing campaign. I mean, in that sense, right?
Yeah, but there could be a backlash. I mean, people little by little, people are going to start, realizing my job is in danger. My job. I mean, when it hits home, that's when you start worrying about that. Fortunately, the whole world is not Silicon Valley or San Francisco, where the state of California has allowed self-driving cars, and I think the only other city is Phoenix, Arizona, because Phoenix is built on a grid. Parallel streets and perpendicular streets, so it's very easy for an AI car to get around. Boston is ridiculous. New York, I don't think we'll ever see a self-driving car.
Oh my gosh, you heard it here. You heard it here, folks. You heard it here.
No. I mean, and I some people are saying, oh yeah, self-driving cars will be in New York within 10 years. I said, there's no way. And I remember a conversation with Eric Schmidt, who, when Waymo was still part of Google, I said, Eric, the problem isn't the self-driving car. The technology has been around for more than 15 years. The problem are other humans. And Eric said, yeah, what we need to do is eliminate human drivers and everybody go over to an automatic self-driving car, which makes it's unrealistic, but it does make sense. That would take away the unpredictability of human drivers, and then everybody would have to drive into self-driving. That would probably work. And of course, the advantage is that accidents would go way down. But the problem is the mix, and not just in terms of driving, but in terms of everything. Human beings are messy, and they don't run on algorithms and things like that. So until and I know that AI platforms are working on this. They're working with the messiness of dealing with human beings, because if you ignore human beings, then you're no longer going to be able to do anything in reality. Yesterday and the day before, Elon was again in the news, not because of his political difficulties, but because of Neuralink. He's helping paraplegics or quadriplegics actually walk again and do things with their mind because of the Neuralink. And Elon has understood that the technology has to help human beings. It has to interact with human beings. And right now, Neuralink is only useful for motor coordination and movements, and so it works in the cortex of the brain. But Elon wants to make Neuralink interface with the central nervous system, and even with abstract reasoning. And there's a whole philosophical debate going on right now about that. I don't think it's possible, but he's certain. This is just the first step. And I remember last year he said that he applied for permission from the FDA to experiment on humans, and there was a reporter from the Wall Street Journal which asked me about that, and I said, there's no way the FDA is going to give him permission to experiment on human beings. And sure enough, within 6 months, he got the permission to experiment with Neuralink on human beings and with quadriplegics primarily. And he did.
Father, doesn't that make you question then? I mean, you're saying that, you won't see self-driving cars in Boston because it's too complicated. I mean, Tesla's doing a pretty good job navigating the road. I mean, we know that a lot of people are, not paying attention when they're driving, and Teslas are having to navigate really on themselves, right? And they have a pretty good driving record, I mean, what was it said? Peter Thiel said, never bet against Elon, right? So, I mean, if he got the FDA to approve, human trials for Neuralink, and he's basically deploying his cars now, I believe he's doing kind of a self-driving pilot as well. I'm not sure if it's city, if it's Austin or whatever else. I mean, he just released Grok 4. I think it was yesterday, right? And it had PhD capability in more domains than any model before. It did better than on Arc Challenge, right? I mean, double what the other companies are capable of. And
Yeah, that was in the news
Right.
yesterday. Right. Never bet against Elon. um, Tesla, Elon said once that Tesla is really an AI company, and I think he's right, because these cars are completely self-driving. That they're capable of driving themselves, but because of the legal issues and some of the difficulties uh, that Tesla has faced, Elon prefers to have it 95 or 96% self-driving, but there always has to be a driver in the driver's seat and with his hands on the wheel. Now, I have been in a Tesla that drove itself, because you just push a button and the driver takes his hands off the wheel and it drives itself. But then you can push a button and you go back to driving it, the human being
Yeah, but
driving it.
he's
So,
manufacturing Cybercab now, right? Which doesn't even have a steering wheel, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's going into
yeah.
production. I mean, that's Taylor. I'm just guys got to ask, like, when you saw the Grok 4 presentation today, and you heard Elon doing his thing, right? It's PhD at all disciplines or something like that. Like, I'm just curious, like, what did you think about that whole presentation?
I thought it was great. I also don't see that as a fundamentally human attribute, right? A lot of what we're talking about here ends up both with regard to self-driving cars, both with regard to like the amount of stuff a particular model knows, ends up not being categorically different from how humans themselves operate. And I think it's important to, when I mentioned leaning into your humanity earlier, I think it's important to understand where statistical knowing, which is something we can do, but not the only thing we can do, really lands in the whole algorithmic AI space, where, if you, the better you're able to get close to the right answers or close to a set of possible right answers in a model, that's great and all, but it still takes the human, or at least another model programmed by our human, in order to determine what true is, to differentiate there. I think kind of driving towards a paradigm where, oh, surely that is too complex for an algorithm to solve, is a fool's errand, because just throw more compute at it, right? What I think the really leaning into the humanity is what categorically do we do that is different than that statistical knowing of taking a bunch of data and trying to build a pattern out of it, because how we think, how we operate as humans is fundamentally different.
Do you think, Taylor, like, there's going to be parts of the economy that only humans are going to be able to do, or do you feel eventually it's possible AI and robots to be able to do it? Because I saw the recently Y Combinator had their big event, and the guy who created the ARC challenge was giving a keynote, and he was saying, like, AGI really is about kind of unlocking fluid intelligence, and and I was like, that feels like it's a way off. And then I saw today or yesterday that Elon had like doubled, scored higher than on ARC, twice as good as any other performing. And I thought, man, maybe that's not as far away as we think, and it made me rethink that, maybe there really will be very few to. Anyways, what do you think?
I think that AI touches every possible job there is out there. If you need to look at a book, if you need to talk with another human in order to understand something about something, if there's a body of knowledge that you need to access as part of your work, then you should be working alongside a AI companion, because it is the Google search, it is the Library of Alexandria, it is in small ways and increasingly large ways a adversarial thought partner that helps you think through certain kinds of questions in different kinds of ways, if you utilize it appropriately, all of which can help you in most jobs and most sorts of professions.
And if we look at that, Father Philip, like, to turn this to you for a second, we look at that and we see, okay, this is optimizing, the efficiency is going up. That's all fantastic, but do we risk losing replacing in a way humanity in that sense? If you look at things and we look at work and we look at productivity, and a human essentially is unable in almost any metric to be able to compete in that sense, people start to look at a very bleak outlook. And with regards to the poster that you saw up for, don't hire a human, why would you do that? Well, I could very easily see lots of young people growing up today who are, doing their education, who are trying to get good at skills, who are trying to form themselves, saying, well, what's the point? Where can we hold on to? If we were leaning into our humanity in that sense, what would that look like?
One of the things with which I'm in agreement with Ray Kurzweil is that this represents another stage in human evolution. And so, Ben, I think you're right. If we continue along the path that we've been walking for the past 1,000, 2,000 years, if we realize that we are only going to be meaningful or useful in the universe by adapting and changing according to the presence of AI in society, then we're going to get along. Then we have a future. Uh, a lot of people are burying their heads in the sand and hoping. I speak, from my experience in higher education, where the provost is telling professors to change their syllabus, to incorporate AI, to understand that students are using it, et cetera, et cetera. I radically changed mine last year, and I think it worked out well. But there are some professors who are saying, no, it's a fad. It will pass. I'm not going to worry about AI. Well, it's Taylor, you probably have a lot more to say about this than I do, but it's not going to pass. It's here to stay, and it's only going to become more significant. So, Ben, I think that, and I tell my students, I said, don't pursue a career that can be taken over by an AI. Now, Goldman Sachs did a report on what jobs are going to be lost, and I take advantage to tell my students, especially the male students, the priesthood will never be taken over by an AI. So,
Boom.
Go into the priesthood, and you'll be, that will never be taken over. But for example, coding. The Wall Street Journal came out with an article last week saying 97,000 jobs have been lost in the tech sector because of AI, and particularly because of programmers and coders. The AIs do it better than faster and with greater efficiency, et cetera. So I tell my students, don't go in, don't become a coder. Don't go into programming software, because the AIs can do it better. Physical therapy, that's probably not going to be taken over by an AI, but Elon is convinced that his robots will be able to do that. What's he call them? Optimus. So imagine Grok inside one of Elon's robots. These are going to be pretty impressive things out there in society, and you could probably train the robot in terms of human anatomy in order to stimulate a certain muscle, or you do this for the leg or something. So you would think that a physical therapist would never be taken over by an AI, but even that. Even that may be up for grabs. Look at the legal industry, medicine. We have a professor here at Boston College who's a specialist in terms of AI in medicine, and he just flew to Notre Dame for a convention that they're having, this weekend on that subject. And Taylor, I'm sure, could add a lot more. The list goes on, and he said before that almost every aspect of human life and society is being touched in some way by AI. I agree with that.
And Taylor and Matthew, if I may, when you guys look at the roadmap ahead, and you look, let's say 6 months, a year, a few years from now, what areas do you feel are going to be fundamentally transformed in the best way possible? And what areas do you feel, if we look at societal architecture and the foundational building blocks of society, are going to remain more or less unchanged, if we were to look at the future?
I think it's important to remember what Gates said with regard to the pace of technological change. He says we generally overestimate what can happen in 5 years and underestimate what can happen in 10. What we're seeing here is with AI in particular is the application of a really powerful technology in a distribution system that has already been set up by virtue of the internet, by virtue of software in general, that allows you to ship a whole lot really quickly into a whole bunch of spaces that we generally consider white collar, right? The interesting thing about this is because it's hitting knowledge work in particular, knowledge workers are able to accelerate what they're able to do as a result of that. Now, our kind of stereotypical way, perhaps, of thinking about this is, sweet, now I have Chat GPT in order to write a Mad Lib for my brother's, bachelor party or something like that. And these more trivial ways of working in, it manages my calendar, it helps manage my email. I think the more fundamental ways in which AI is being used, for example, in AI for scientific discovery, where you're able to simulate billions of experiments before getting to the experiments that actually need to be run in the real world in order to come up with a new protein or a new drug or a new therapeutic. It gives us a better insight into how knowledge workers can also apply this to different kinds of technology. So it's if you're a robotics manufacturer, for example, or a robotics researcher where you're attempting to do the Boston Dynamic thing, right? All of a sudden you have this accelerant next to you, this thought partner who's able to who doesn't get tired, who has no interests other than the ones that you tell it to be interested in, that allows you to accelerate your own research as a robotics researcher, driving that particular technology forward. Now, right, we're still going to have to build the robots. We're still going to have to build the things in the hard mechanical real world space that allows software and artificial intelligence to be those real world companions. But we've given ourselves as a motorcycle for the mind, to kind of riff off of Steve Jobs's, the computer is a bicycle for the mind. And that's really where we're seeing all of these all of the human ways in which we're utilizing this technology to touch every aspect of our life. We can think like it lives still inside of a machine, and it hasn't breached the the software to real world sort of space, but we have. And as a companion of our intelligence in that sort of searching, researching, adversarial sort of way, it helps us touch all of those other spaces.
That's fantastic. And Taylor, when you look at this potential for change and for this potential for acceleration and innovation in that sense, what are you most excited about when you look at the capacity for AI to change the world?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm most excited about is that I think that we maybe two aspects of work in the last century that we've kind of fallen into that haven't been true of the centuries before, that I think are problematic. One is um, uh, a lot of our work requires us to go into an office and sit behind a little blue screen for 8 hours a day, sitting in these particular chairs and kind of typing away, dedicating a lot of our visual attention to a particular screen. That's very strange in the history of the world, right? We're the only people who have done that. Um, and so I'm excited for the new modalities, new paradigms that allow us to do more work in a more human sort of way, because of the intellectual companion that AI can be in terms of getting certain kinds of tasks done. Even myself, commuting to work or dropping my daughters off at school now, can have substantive work-related conversations with my artificial intelligence agents that allow me to be working in a much easier and richer way than I have before. And that's just kind of barely scratching the surface in terms of a new modality. I think the other thing that is really going to help us shift up, and although this depends on how we want to reshape our understanding of work as a society, is if I effectively have a fleet of agents that can do a lot of work that I perhaps used to do on my behalf, why can't we shift to something like a 30-hour work week? Why can't we realize the vision that I anticipate will happen in the next calendar year or so, as Sam Altman anticipates too, of having the first one-person billion-dollar valuation company? Agents could do a lot of different kinds of work, and if they're orchestrated by the human, which is how AI should be used, and its highest value is found is orchestrated by a human, why can't we approach this from kind of an era of abundance, or an era of redefining what work means, so that we get to spend more time with each other, with that sort of leisure as the basis of culture sort of concept?
Taylor, don't you think that's going to be necessary? I mean, let's face it. I mean, how long is a human going to be orchestrating all these agents, right? I mean, pretty soon. I mean, if let's say like you're Elon Musk and you're trying to get to Mars, right? I mean, at some point, he's just going to like hand over a lot of this computation and stuff, even the manufacturing, to like a fleet of AIs and robots, right? And I'm sure there'll be a human in the loop, but I mean, how many humans are going to be necessary in that process? And that's something like the thing that like does worry me is, I think when they're probably by the end of the Trump administration, robots, they're going to start, really rationing up manufacturing of these robots, right? And all of a sudden the blue collars can become painfully aware that these robots are coming for their jobs. It's going to take, several years to get the manufacturing capacity there, but it's coming. And people are going to read between the lines and like, this is it. And I worry about like that violent like reaction to that, right? Saying like, if they don't have a vision of the future and they're not assured that their like Maslow needs, like shelter, the ability to feed their children and things like that are addressed, that they're going to be okay. They may, like, I could see people being like pissed off and the pitchforks are in the streets and they want to stop this thing, right, and slow it down. And I mean, like, it's happened in the past, and I don't feel good about this transition being managed properly right now, because I just don't think that the average person is aware of the rate at which this technological development is happening, and I don't think the companies and even maybe some of the governments are as honest about what the longer term implications of this are. I mean, a lot of what we hear is, it's going to be 50%. Of work, right? I think that's nonsense. I mean, like in a capitalist economy where they have to continually compete, right? Obviously, AI and robots, which can work, 18 hours a day, they stop to charge. In the case of robots, AI just can work around the clock. Really, you're just compute constrained. They're going to have to continue to give more and more of these jobs over to AI and robots to stay competitive. And aside from maybe a few areas, right, where people are willing to pay more for goods and services because they want a human to deliver them. I just think that this movement is probably going to be inevitable, and I don't think people, like, generally speaking, know that that's the reality. And I don't see like the Trump administration or any real government around the world selling a vision of the future where AI and robots are somehow working like harmoniously with us to basically maximize human flourishing, and what that practically would look like.
Ben, if I could just chime in here quickly. Matthew and I have talked about this subject for many years, and we agree on the outlook, the not too far away in the future outlook. And I think that's why we both subscribe to the Human Flourishing Framework. Harvard's program of Human Flourishing is doing a lot of work on this. Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia has the Happiness Index, which has a certain popularity. Every year he puts out a study in collaboration with the United Nations, and it's quite popular. What makes people happy, and from a human flourishing framework, happiness is just one of the issues. There are many others. What are called different sectors. Or different categories of human flourishing. And I think the sooner we adopt that framework, the better, because, and Matthew and I were just talking about this yesterday, people tend to tie their purpose in life and how they find meaning in existence to their jobs, at least to a large part, their families and as well, or their religion. I mean, these are all basic parts. But I think fundamentally, people need a job in order to have meaning in their life. Now, this is going to have to change because a lot of people are going to be without a job, and yet they still need to find purpose and meaning in life. This is one of the categories of human flourishing, and the sooner we realize that, the better. Taylor's comment about leisure being the key to culture. That actually comes from the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks understood, like Plato, Aristotle, the philosophers, but even the political philosophers also, that made Athens the first democracy. They understood that people needed downtime. People needed leisure in order to think about the most important subjects in life. What is the meaning of life? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What makes me happy? Aristotle wrote an entire treatise on what makes people happy, and his answer was living a good life. And what is a good life? Living according to the virtues. And there are different ethical systems that have been devised over the years, especially in the West. The East, I think, has a whole different paradigm. But we're grappling with that now. What is a good life? What do we need to do to achieve happiness? And we have to figure in the equation the presence of AI. And I think we there are there are tendencies in society of people thinking about this and offering solutions, or offering avenues towards greater meaning in life. And I think we need to go down that road, and even in to a greater extent.
No,
And Father, if I may, when you speak with people developing AI, and they're obviously the amount of impact, the amount of change that's going to happen because of an AI is enormous. What are the blind spots that you see when they're talking about AI in the project, and they might mention human flourishing, or they might mention some secular version of this language, but if they're not, one of the things that we've talked a lot about is that the Catholic Church has seen and experienced technological revolutions before, whether it was the Industrial Revolution, the different societal transformations, and it's has this body of knowledge. But when we're looking at, a lot of these developers who are working in Silicon Valley, and they obviously, have different mindsets, different, I guess, ethical ways of looking at things. What are the blind spots that they have, that they're not, that they're not embedding in this technology that's going to have such an enormous impact on all of our lives?
Most of the people that I speak with are very aware of the importance of what they're doing. Now, again, there's kind of a natural selection. Somebody who could care less about humanity and just wants to make money is probably not going to reach out and talk with me. There are a lot of people. Having been born in Mountain View, I think helps, because Google made their headquarters there. But we're in contact with Demis Hassabis, with Jitu Patel from Cisco, and Eric Schmidt. The list goes on, and Sam Altman himself. The Most of these people who are creating the future understand the significance of what they're doing, and are generally interested in helping people and helping society. Now, what for example, every time that I have invited Demis to go to the Vatican, he's come. Well, he lives in London, so it's a little bit easier. But Demis is now a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. He won the Nobel Prize in chemistry a few months ago for AlphaFold. He's just an amazing person, and he has a great heart. And the reason he won the Nobel Prize is because he's using AI in order to help humanity. To understand how proteins fold is the secret to vaccinations, to antibiotics, to even a cure to cancer. Demis is convinced within 10 years, many of the diseases that ravaged the human race will be solved by a collaboration between AI and human beings. And I I think he's right. I don't know. 10 years may be a little bit too soon. Taylor can speak to that. But if there is a blind spot, it's the market. These huge platforms are dependent on the market incentive, and that has been kind of that's the weakest link. When you can't tell these people to stop innovation, or don't worry about DeepSeek and the Chinese and things like that, because the competitive edge that the United States has right now is very, very small. It used to be maybe 3 years ahead of other companies and other countries, and now that's probably 3 months. And what DeepSeek did in January, it almost tanked Nvidia, is an example of just the how volatile the market is. And so my one wish is that these people, the heads of the platforms, just, there are other considerations than the market value of your
But
company.
Father, like, don't you think like they're inherently? I mean, I think Demis Haspis and those guys I think they're generally good guys. They got kids, obviously they care about the future, but at the same time, they have shareholders, right? So I mean, they're going to limits to what they can say. And I think actually Demis and Dario from Anthropic have actually been surprisingly vocal about the need for regulation and things like that, because they understand how disruptive these technologies are going to be. But but if CEOs are always going to be kind of limited in what they can say. They can only be so doomerist, right? And like I don't know, governments also, I mean, China and the U.S. are not going to take their foot off the gas, because they obviously feel like getting to AGI is absolutely critical, because whoever gets to AGI will have major economic unlocks and probably military ones, right? So they're probably not going to slow down, and which means like regulation is probably not going to be their priority. I mean, to date, obviously that seems to be the case. So who is going to be like championing like the regular person, right? Like who's going to be like pressuring like these governments in like at least in a soft way to make sure these technologies are pointed at the right problems, and that they're properly regulated with the right safety rails and things like that. I mean, I think some people think with the Pope's new interest in this technology that maybe he's one of those voices. But do you think, how effective do you think he's going to be at steering this technology? I mean, if he is able to share some kind of positive vision for what is the right balance between AI and humans, and how could we live, how could we recapture our humanity and be liberated in some ways from this GDP economy so we have more time for leisure? Like, do you think he's going to be effective at selling that vision? And like to what extent, should the church have a role in this conversation? Taylor, that's for you too, man.
In the absence of a universal consensus on regulation, the Pope's voice is very, very powerful, and his voice is a universal voice. He's not talking. He's from Chicago, but he's not just talking about the U.S. He's talking about the world, and my hope is that he will assist efforts which are going on in the Vatican already, to invite the major players, particularly the CEOs of the platforms, to the Vatican, and to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences with Cardinal Turkson, but also Archbishop Tai at the Dicastery for Culture and Education, in order to come up with solutions. One interesting fact that went a little bit under the radar was Melania Trump's efforts to pass a law called Take It Down. She invited a high school student that was a victim of deep fake to the inauguration in January 2025. And that same high school student was with her when Donald Trump signed the law fining platforms and people who come up with deep fakes, which are shall we say, scandalous or derogatory towards human beings. The and that was Melania. And that's a powerful ally to have, in the White House. But Chuck Schumer, I think, is also very active in trying to get some sort of law in the books, but Chuck knows a lot of people in Silicon Valley. He, Sam has told me every time that he's been invited to Washington, he's gone. And even Mark Zuckerberg also, who doesn't enjoy being being interrogated by the Senate Committee on Technology and Innovation, but he himself has gone many times to Washington to speak with the senators. And then last year, Chuck organized a behind closed door meeting with a bunch of execs, and it was funny at the beginning. They had kind of a press. It was closed doors at the end, but you did know who was there. So on the one hand, you have Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Sam Altman. They're on one side, and on the other side, you have all the senators of the committee, and it's just like two different worlds. So, because the tech people really don't know how to make a law, which is fine, but they know how the tech works. And then the senators know how to make laws, but they really don't understand how the tech works. And if you remember, Taylor will probably remember the senators asking Mark Zuckerberg about how Instagram works and Facebook. They have no idea. And Mark was trying to be understanding without being condescending, because you kind of assume that people know how this stuff works, that they had no idea. And so Mark was saying, well, I'll take you through it if you're really interested. This is how it works, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that we do know is that the senators do not like the AI Act in the European community. So the EC has passed a law called the AI Act, and it was approved by Parliament last year. It's now being implemented, which governs the use of artificial intelligence in the European community. So obviously the European, I know some of the people that helped draft the act. One is Luciano Floridi, who now works at Yale. Yale established a center for the ethics of AI, and Luciano is in charge of that. He used to work at Oxford. Matthew, you know him. You also know Maria Teresa, who was one of his closest colleagues at Oxford. She's still there at the Institute for the Ethics of the Internet. And other people, Father Paolo Bonanti helped draft it, and so it's an interesting law, but it's not going to be applied in the U.S. And one of the things that, and I want to hear Taylor on this, but Chuck Schumer said it takes about 5 years to establish a law, and and he said, we could start getting a law on AI, but within 5 years, it's going to be completely obsolete. So why bother?
Taylor, and that's my point, Taylor. Effectively, I understand why Demise would say, regulation, but obviously that's not going to work in this paradigm, right? So, it's kind of weird for me that the Pope and the companies, I just don't know effectively if that's going to work. And so I but I'm curious to know from your perspective, how far do you think those companies would go to kind of line up with the Pope on some kind of vision?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a lot to unpack here. Definitely, regulation is an important thing. I do think it is too slow as well. But the interesting thing here that's remarkable to me, and it actually reminds me a lot of some of Walker Percy's work with regard to the loss of the creature. But when kind of universities started happening, and we particularly in the modern era, when a large amount of our population is university educated, there's kind of a way in which we as lay people have given us, surrendered a bit of our own intelligence, a bit of our own thinking to this to experts. And it's not really the expert's fault saying, hey, I'm the person, the authority, the oracle who should be trusted in the situation. It's really that we kind of eagerly surrendered our own intellectual sovereignty so that we could assume the role of a consumer. And I think we've done this in a variety of different areas in our life because it's easy, because it's a abrogation of but it's problematic because it's an abrogation of our own intelligence, right? And I'm not saying that everybody is now an authority on everything, right? That's not what I'm saying here. But it's a, you as a human being possess this God-given unrestricted desire to know, and know beauty, being, truth, all of that, and you got to use it. You got to use that when you're opening up your app on your phone, when you're telling your children how they should be thinking about their pursuit of that unrestricted desire to know. And we as lay people now have the best amount of information, the best amount of steady things that I remember Louis L'Amour, in fact, quipped that it's no one should have a claim to be uneducated when you can go down to the corner bookstore and buy the collected works of Plato for 50 cents, right? It's on us. It's the lay people. We are the ones who are using these artificial intelligence tools. We are the ones who are trotting into work and building these artificial intelligence tools. We are the demand. We are the ones creating. It's like we need to take back our own ownership of how we exist in our intellectual lives in order to, as good employees, as good consumers of this technology, you say, hey, this is how we want to live as humans, and that's on us.
Dude, I think that's totally refreshing, because I couldn't agree more. And I think like a year or two ago, I think a bit more cynical about this. But you remember when like that omnibus bill, they were trying to ram that through around Christmas or something. They gave like, it was like some massive like tome, right? And they gave like, it was like it 48 hours to read it or something. Like, and could think like in like a few years ago, I mean, like impossible, right, for people to crunch that. And I remember like someone must have uploaded online, because I remember like on X, all of a sudden people had access to it and they were using AI to query this thing, right? And they were pulling out all kinds of wacky stuff, and they were all saying this is outrageous. And then they were saying we got to stop this thing, or we got to get this out of this bill. Call your congressman and senator. And I'm sure that was extremely annoying for them. But I mean, effectively, they got it from like this to like this. And I think overall, most people felt that was kind of collectively a win, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think like what a beautiful example of participatory democracy, right? Where people have the opportunity to kind of like, look through this document and kind of figure out how do they feel about it. And then, to take advantage of an opportunity to actually let it be known where they stand. And then, effective democracy does this thing, right? And I think like that is one really exciting way for me, for us, I think, to even in the realm of like AI policy and regulation, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're not like cool with the way AI and robotics is, rolling out, then what better way to let our politicians know that we're not cool with it, right? Is just to call them up and let them know. And I think, because as you're saying, Taylor, like with AI and stuff like that, I think we have the ability to kind of crawl the news and get access to way more information than we ever had before. And we have this like secretary who can distill it for us. Right.
Yeah. Well, and not just policy, right? The actual companies producing this are selling it to somebody. We are the somebody. If we are good customers, we will tell these companies creating these things what we want.
Yeah. And here, I'd just like to turn to, there's two questions that are kind of interconnected here from our audience. This is from Kimberly, and she says in the comments that she's a mother, and she has a high school boy, and she's asking for practical advice on what to do for a parent who has a child who's going to be entering college in the next few years. Taylor, Matthew, Father Philip, our audience here, of course, is curious and concerned. What advice for those parents and younger students who are looking to build their futures I guess optimizing flourishing in that sense?
Yeah, I have a 14-year-old myself, so this is a very really important question, and I'll just say something really small. I think first off, humans require a relationship. So being in good relationship with your kids ends up being a vital part through these teenage years, something that I struggle with and attempt to achieve in ever richer ways, so that this kind of communication as to how do I figure out what is true can still happen and still be taken into all of the different places where my teenager may have those questions. That's my small answer to that. Not saying, of course, Kimberly, that you don't already have that, but that is your strongest way of helping your teenager navigate this period.
This is like one of the most common questions I get. Like when I'm doing talks is, and like my general answer would be this: like, assume that in 4 years the job market is going to be extremely difficult and very competitive, right? And it's only going to get worse. I think the number of people who are going to be willing to like hybridize with AI systems for like crazy levels of output, right? So they can get hired by one of these companies, I think it's not going to be a lot of people ultimately who will be able to get those jobs. And so I think a lot of people are going to be left, possibly with some time on their hands. But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think aside from like leisure and like hopefully developing your spiritual intellectual formation, human formation, I do think there'll always be work to do. And so like I would generally say in this in either world, like the GDP economy or whatever it is we're moving into now, knowing who you are, knowing what your gifts are, and figuring how you want to put those at the service of others, and therefore to honor God is the most important thing. I mean, I ultimately think we don't spend enough time in the education system figuring out what am I good at? Like, what do I love to do? And when I engage in whatever it is I'm doing, it doesn't feel like work. I mean, even if they said I'm not going to pay you, I would still want to do this because it feels like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I generally do feel that everybody has some God-given gifts and abilities. And if we have the time to explore and truly find out what those things are, I think it won't matter if we're in the GDP economy or we're in some other kind of economy. We'll just apply ourselves to that because we find it rewarding and feel like we're doing what God meant us to do. And I think that's very hard. But I don't think our current education system has been very effective at that. I think for the most part, like I said before, it's, I go to school so I get a certificate so that I can get a degree so that I can get a job, which allow me to have a mortgage, right? And then put my kids through college, and the cycle continues and continues. And I think in this new economy that we're heading towards, I think we'll be able to break that paradigm. And I think this could, ultimately be a great thing for humanity.
Yeah, Benjamin, what first day of class, I tell my students, the more that you farm out to an AI what you should be doing yourself, the more you set yourself up to fail in the future. So I have them imagine a room with a future boss, themselves, and an AI, the three of them sitting in a room. And the boss points to the individual and say, okay, you have a master's degree from Boston College in psychology or in marketing or whatever. What do you bring to the table that the AI doesn't? And if all you've been doing in your career is using AI, you're stuck. You're not going to have anything to give. There's no reason why someone should hire you instead of an AI. And, I kind of poke fun at Matthew. I said, look, he's in charge of a company. Look at yourself, Matthew. If an AI can do the work that a human can do, and they do it better and cheaper and more efficiently, what are you going to choose? And it's a no-brainer. Of course. Now, not all jobs can be substituted with an AI, but many of them can. And Matthew may even say to the person, because they're, like Taylor said, human relationships are important. And Matthew may have a relationship with one of his coworkers or one of his employees, and he's going to say, well, sorry, I'm going to have to let you go. So he may not like it, but that doesn't change the option that
I'm trying to get myself fired. I mean, like, hey, if the problem that I'm trying to solve for in building scale and Catholic life can be effectively accomplished by something that's better than me, I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm looking forward to that leisure, right? Which I haven't had my entire career. So, but I think, I think all of us on this call, like, we've been beneficiaries of the great Catholic, tradition, have had time for spiritual and intellectual and human formation. And so we benefited from that. But I think any company that's truly focused on solving real problems, right? I think that, meaning they're mission-driven companies, cares about outcomes, more than anything else. And I think that, obviously people are going to be displaced because of these changes and things like that. But I think as long as people can see that there's still a place for you, right, in the future, there's still a place where you matter, your skills matter, right? Even if that means that what you're best at is just, talking to other people, right? Building relationships. I think that, that kind of future, the one where we kind of get back to what really kind of matters in life. I think that's what kind of motivates me is creating that world, not maintaining the current paradigm, right? Where I work longer and longer and longer because the world keeps getting, worse and worse and worse. And the problems just seem so daunting. They require all of my time and attention.
And here in the closing minutes here, we have a few questions from our audience that I'd just like to get some quick hits. Matthew, Taylor, Father Philip, there's a few audience members who are saying that they are curious about AI and where can they first start? Where can they learn? A few have also asked about Catholic AI, and we'd of course like to point them to Magisterium AI as an incredible Catholic answering machine. But Matthew, if you could just share with our audience a few quick hits here.
I've talked enough, but suffice it to say, I mean, if you're trying to figure out like what AI to use, I think there's the obvious ones, right? The products of all the major AI labs. You got Gemini, you got Claude, right, from Anthropic, and you have Microsoft has. But I think I would say part of this decision-making process be: do I like this company? Do I trust this company? Do I feel this company is a force for good in the world? Nowadays, most of the companies have models which are pretty much at parity with one another, right? It's very competitive. So I think you can actually be discriminating to some extent. And I think this is actually very important for us as consumers, because if we choose to use one AI over another because we believe that the company is trying to work harder on AI human alignment, or is trying to be a positive force in the world, then I think that ultimately will actually help the rest of the companies, to pivot and head in the same direction.
Yeah, Benjamin, the short answer for me would talk to any college student. They know this stuff really, really well, and they use different platforms for different things across different departments. This is one of the great things about Boston College. I'm on the steering committee for AI. Is that there's no one unified declaration about AI. The president has allowed the different departments to come up with their own, and we have almost 30 different departments. So the philosophy department is going to be much different than the chemistry department, than the nursing school, than the law school. And the way that those students use the AI platforms are very, very different. So if you're new to this, I just grab a college student and say, hey, take me through how to use this stuff, because they are experts. They actually teach us professors a lot about how to use the AI.
And also ask the AIs. Try a couple of them out. Ask them, why should I be using you, and what are you good at? And then make your own human-informed decision as well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Father Philip. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Matthew. This has been a wonderful conversation. And for all of our audience that is watching online, please follow us online at the Builders AI Forum for all of our latest updates. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.